What's going on, everyone? I'm Andrew J. Welcome to episode 5 of J by the Bay. I'm excited to be back and can't wait to dive into today's topics. Today, I'll be presenting my preseason first team All American list. This is one of my favorite things to do every college football offseason. I love putting together this list and seeing what it looks like once the season wraps. Now, there are going to be some names that everyone expects, and then there's also going to be names where people are just like, Drew, what are you saying? Seriously, this guy? But that's what makes it fun. But I'm thrilled to be sharing it with you. Remember, football news, football conversations, football year round. With that being said, let's get into it. Starting at quarterback, it's really not a shocker, but I'm going with Arch Manning out of Texas. I think this is the year he becomes the best quarterback in college football. He's my Heisman favorite, and I also think he takes home the Maxwell Award as well as the Davey O'Brien Trophy. I just think, Texas has just really built one of the best rosters in all of college football this offseason. He'll have one of the best offensive lines blocking for him this year, not to mention Trevor Gooseby, who's actually my pick for the Outland Trophy, but I'll get into that later. Additionally, he's got weapons, bringing back Ryan Wingo, who's going to be coming back again for another solid season, and then also Cam Coleman, who is arguably the top transfer portal receiver coming in from Auburn, and he's just a big target for him to throw to. But I think he just has all the pieces for him to have a monster season. But I've been buying stock in Arch Manning all off season, and I'm not going to stop now. Some other people that I did consider for the quarterback position was Dante Moore out of Oregon, who was actually on my second team list, and then Julian Sayin out of Ohio State, who ended up being on my third team. At running back, this one I did kind of mull over a little bit, but ultimately I ended up landing on Ahmad Hardy. Hardy, I think he's just already proven he can carry an offense, and I think he finishes the year as the nation's best running back, taking home the Doak Walker Award. My second running back is Quan Lacey out of Ole Miss, who really just came out on the scene last year for Ole Miss, and he's part of the reason why they just had such an explosive offense last year. But he's probably one of my bigger projection picks, and I think he's just in a position to absolutely just go off again this season. And I expect him to just be one of the biggest breakout running backs this season, one of the bigger stars. Some other people that I did consider here was L.J. Martin out of BYU and Mark Fletcher Jr. out of Miami. At receiver, it's not really a shocker or a hot take here. Let's start with Jeremiah Smith. Jeremiah Smith, as you see on the graphic there, he's got some OSU records that I think he probably will be breaking this year. He's getting these 39 more receptions to break the record for receptions, 341 receiving yards there. And then you got 9 receiving touchdowns. That might be the toughest one to reach, but I absolutely, that's doable, especially with Julian Sayin throwing, slinging them the ball. But I think he's the best, receiver in America right now. I thought he was the best receiver since he stepped foot on Columbus 2 years ago. But yeah, I think he wins and takes home the Biletnikoff Award as, college football's best receiver. Next is Malachi Tony out of Miami. Dazzling freshman that just took off last year. Big part of that Miami offense. Really helped out Carson Beck a lot. But I think he's going to emerge as one, if not one of the, ACC's biggest stars this year. I think he's primed to put together a huge season. And then I have got Cam Coleman, who I thought he was the top transfer portal receiver. He was at Auburn last year. He's going to be going over to Texas, this year. He's got Arch Manning thrown to him now, so I think that's just going to just open a whole bunch of doors for him, and I think it's ultimately going to make him a first round pick, prospect. But I'm extremely high on Cam this year. Pairing him, like I said, pairing him with Arch Manning, that's just going to form a insane passing attack for Texas this year. And I think this duo is going to light up the scoreboards every Saturday. Some other guys that I did consider here was obviously, Ryan Coleman Williams had a little bit of I wouldn't call it so much of a down season, but compared to what he did his freshman year 2 seasons ago. But I have him on my list here. Deuce Robinson, who's another huge receiver over there in Tallahassee for Florida State. And then also KJ Duff out of Rutgers. Rutgers, I think, is going to actually have a very good offense this year. But I had KJ Duff on this list for that. At tight end, I went with Trey'Dez Green from LSU. I did kind of go back and forth on this. I was kind of flip-flopping, but I ultimately landed on him. He's just got all the physical tools to dominate the position, and I think he ends up winning the Mackey Award this year, and which ultimately will probably end up making him the first tight end off the board in next year's 2027 draft. I did also like Jamari Johnson here, but he'll end up being my second team tight end. And then as well as Terrence Carter Jr. out of Texas Tech, who's on my third team list. But a lot of good names that I could have put here, but ultimately Trey Green, on my first team. And then, like I said, Jamari Johnson. There's a lot of weapons on that Oregon defense, Oregon offense. But I think he just, Dante Moore thrown to him. It's just he's going to take off. I mentioned in my previous episode with Blair, Jamari Johnson was overshadowed last year because of Kenyon Sadiq, but he put together a phenomenal year. Over 500 receiving yards. I believe that he ended up with, I think it was 7 receiving touchdowns. I could be wrong there, but yeah, he had a great season. And then Terrence Carter Jr., there's no denying the talent there. But yeah, there's a lot of tight ends that I could have went with here. Along the offensive line, I've got Justin Evans Jenkins at center from Nebraska, taking home the Remington Trophy. I could have went with a couple different names here, but him, I love his versatility along the line. He really got his first full season as a center last year after, moving over from guard. But guy is just a tank, and he's just a beast, and he's phenomenal on the line. Just taking a look there from his last year's stats, 13 starts at the center position, 0 sacks allowed, only 3 penalties called on him last year. So yeah, Justin Evans Jenkins, I really like this guy, and I think he takes home the Remington Trophy as the best center in all of college football. Yeah, he's my pick. Guard, I could have won with a couple different people here, a couple different players, but I ultimately decided on Evan Tangsdale out of Cincinnati and Addison Nichols out of from SMU. Both these guys are phenomenal. They anchor their lines. Tangisdal with Cincinnati, he really helps that run game out there. But and then at tackle, Jordan Seaton from LSU and Trevor Gooseby from Texas. As I mentioned, Gooseby's my pick for the Outland Trophy. I think he's just one of the best offensive tackles in college football, and a huge reason why I expect Arch Manning to just have a phenomenal year. However, could have went with there's a lot of great offensive linemen this year. Carter Smith of Indiana, big reason why they had an awesome offense last year and ultimately won the national championship there in Bloomington. Caden Green out of Missouri, I really like his game. I think he has first round pick potential. And then, moving inside, Luke Montgomery out of Ohio State. You can't go wrong with him. Greg Johnson with Minnesota. Cade Piper, there's another guy with, who's very versatile. He has the ability to play center, guard. I'm sure he can even play tackle if you needed him to. You can never go wrong with those Hawkeye offensive linemen. And then Sheridan Wilson out of Texas Tech, who's actually my second team center this year. But yeah, got, phenomenal list. Bunch of tanks, along the line for these teams. Yeah, so yeah, I got Justin Evans Jenkins taking home, first team honors there. Evan Tangsdal out of Cincinnati, and Addison Nichols from SMU taking the guard spots, and then Jordan Seaton out of LSU, and Trevor Gooseby out of Texas taking the tackle spots. Let's flip over to the defensive side of the football, starting with the defensive line. I think Colin Simmons. I think he's arguably the most dominant defensive player in all of college football. That is a bold statement, but just him, I think he ends up winning both the Chuck Bednarik Award as well as the Bronco Nagurski Trophy. His first step is elite. The pass rush arsenal that he possesses, it just continues to improve every year. And I think offensive coordinator is going to have to really, game plan around him, and just offensive linemen have nightmares trying to block him. On the opposite side, Dylan Stewart out of South Carolina, not a big shocker there. Stewart, he has all the physical tools to become one of the nation's premier edge rushers. I think if he takes the next step, I think he will be one of the most disruptive defenders in all of college football. But moving inside, I've got David Stone out of Oklahoma, future first round pick there. Stone has the size, power, explosiveness to just completely change the game, from the interior point. But interior pressure is so valuable, in today's game. I think he's primed to just, have a breakout season for the Sooners. Joining him is Amari Washington from Oregon. I was, you know, really buying stock in my previous episode with Blair. Last episode, he's an anchor on that Oregon defense. Washington's, another player. His ceiling's incredibly high. He's powerful against the run. He's flashes at, as a pass rusher as well. But I think he emerges as one of the top defensive tackles in America this year. But yeah, some other people I did consider here was Cleve Lubin out of Louisville. He had a big season last year. Tatum Tuiodu, another guy along that Oregon offense, big pass rusher, another potential first round pick. Ahmed Moulton Sr. out of Miami, big part of why Miami got to the national championship last year. And Tyreek Tucker out of Indiana was a reason why, big reason why Indiana's defense was so dominant and, led to Indiana winning the national championship against Miami. A lot of other names I could have won here, but this was my list here. But yeah, so yeah, Colin Simmons and Dylan Stewart on the edge, and then Amari Washington and David Stone in the inside. Moving the linebacker, this might be one of my strongest groups on my entire team. But starting off, leading the way is Sammy Brown of Clemson. He's my pick to win the Dick Butkus Award. Brown has the speed to play sideline to sideline. He's physical downhill, and I think he'll establish himself as the best linebacker in college football. Joining him is Kingston Veliamu Assad of Notre Dame. Notre Dame always seems to produce these outstanding linebackers. I think Veliamu Assad is just next in line to join that list. He's instinctive, plays with great physicality, and should be one of the leaders on that defense for the Fighting Irish. Rounding out the group is Centarian Perkins out of Ole Miss, one of the smaller linebackers. He's kind of like one of those hybrid guys, but Perkins is one of the most explosive linebackers out of all of college football. Whether he's rushing the passer or making plays, in space, I expect him to just fill up the stat sheet all season long. Now, there's a couple other guys I did consider for this list. Xavier Atkins out of Auburn, Ben Roberts out of Texas Tech. I really like Ben Roberts. But yeah, there's a lot of guys I could have won here. But yeah, ultimately going with Sammy Brown out of Clemson, Kingston Viliamu Asa out of Notre Dame, and Centarian Perkins out of Ole Miss. Now let's finish with the secondary. At cornerback, this one was not a shocker at all. I went with Leonard Moore from Notre Dame. He's my Jim Thorpe award winner. I thought he could have possibly beat out Caleb Downs last year for this award, but he's already shown he can lock down the corner position. He locks down all the best receivers in college football, and I think this season he takes the next step forward and just becomes the nation's top corner. On the other side is by far my favorite cornerback in all of college football. And that's Kelly Jones out of Mississippi State. He's just not only is he big body, standing 6'3", almost 6'4", and 200 pounds. I mean, Jones is just tremendous. He is phenomenal upside, and I think he's going to be surprised a lot of people this season. You're gonna hear his name a lot this season, and a lot of people are going to be like, "Who the heck is this guy?" But at safety, I've got Bray Hubbard out of Alabama. He proved himself last year, and he's on my first team list for a reason. I mean, he's a complete safety. I mean, when he can play deep, he can play downhill against the run, and he just creates turnovers. On the opposite side of him, I got KJ Bolden from Georgia. Really not another surprise pick at all. Bolden has all the athletic traits. Georgia has a history of developing elite defensive backs, and I just think that KJ Bolden's next in line to join that list. But yeah, some other guys that I did consider here was Brandon Finney Jr. out of Oregon. Again, I voiced my praise for him in the last episode with Blair. And Ellis Robinson the fourth, another Georgia defensive back. He's on the outside at corner. But then Ty Benenfield out of LSU, and again, not a shocker. Coy Parich out of Oregon, another Oregon defender here on the list. But I could have went with anybody on this list. And, I know a lot of people, I'm going to probably get knocked for some of my picks here. But again, it's what makes it fun. Wrapping things up on special teams. I got Brock Taylor from Vanderbilt taking home Lou Groza Award honors this year. Rise Dakin, the Aussie from Iowa. He's winning my Ray Guy Award this year. Iowa just always seems to pump out these punters. That Taylor going to the Chicago Bears and won the fourth round a couple years back. I got Cole Wilson from Baylor. He's my first team kick returner. Ryan Niblett from Texas is my punt returner on first team. And then Ben Anderson from Oklahoma State rounds out the team as my long snapper. So there it is, my 2026 preseason All-American list. Like I said, I mean, I'll probably get knocked for a couple of my picks. But yeah, quarterback, Arch Manning, running back, Ahmad Hardy, Kawan Lacey, wide receivers, Jeremiah Smith, Malachi Toney, Cam Coleman, tight end, Trades Green, center, Justin Evans Jenkins, offensive guard, Evan Tangsdale, Addison Nichols, offensive tackle, Jordan Seaton, Trevor Gooseby, defensive end, Colin Simmons, Dylan Stewart, Defensive tackle, David Stone, Amari Washington. Linebacker, Sammy Brown, Kingston Viliamu Asa, Taron Perkins. And cornerback, Leonard Moore, Kelly Jones. Safety, Bray Hubbard, KJ Bolden. And kicker and punter, Brock Taylor, Rise Dakin. And kick returner, punt returner, Cole Wilson, Ryan Niblett. And then long snapper, Ben Anderson. But like every preseason list, I'm sure there can be some names that I think I left off, but that's part of the fun. But who did I get right? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear your guys' picks. Let me know where I got it wrong. Let me know which picks that you really loved. But as always, if you enjoyed this discussion, please hit that subscribe button. Catch all the latest episodes. You could also catch my content on Instagram at @JByTheBay. But it's going to be a long, fun season. Football season can't get here sooner enough. Still got about 8 more weeks for the NFL, 7 more weeks for college football, but it'll be here sooner than you know it. But guys, as always, thank you so much for tuning in to Jay by the Bay. Like I said, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Please comment. I love your guys' comments. And yeah, don't miss Monday's episode with Blair. Blair will be back on as we mentioned in the previous episode. He's going to be a regular co-host on Mondays, and we love to get your guys' input. But yeah, until then, I'll catch you in the next episode. Take care.